Hello everyone. Now I'm going to tell you about all the features of motion tweaks. First of all, what is motion tweaks? Our approach to scripts is that you instantly get the needed result without interacting with the interface and additional windows as much as possible. By holding Shift, Alt, and Control, you can activate the advanced settings of each function. By hovering over the buttons, you'll see a help tip with advanced features. For example, you can instantly create a shape cube, or by holding down Alt or Option, you can create a cube based on solid layers. Then by holding down Alt or Option, you can add a looped wiggle animation. It will take some time to remember the advanced features, but when you find your favorite ones, you will use them promptly. Let's start with the composition scripts. The precompose script will place all selected layers into separate comps and also crop them with the dimensions of the layer itself. It takes into account the scale of the layer, its rotation, the width of the stroke. Also, it will try to consider even the blurring of the layer border. By holding down Alt or Option, you can precompose without cropping. It may help in more difficult situations as well. For example, if your layer is animated and 3D mode is on, the layer itself will fit into the composition, and the keyframes will be transferred to the composition layer. This will help keep the contents clean. You don't have to transfer anything manually. We've tried to take into account a lot of situations. If your layer is linked to another, built-in precomposing breaks the linking chain. The script will re-link it to the layer again after precomposing. The next script is Scale Comp. It helps to quickly increase the size of all selected compositions. Usually, resizing a composition is tedious. Scale Composition is one of the built-in scripts with interface, but it only resizes one composition. Our version has more features. You can get the result as quickly as possible. By default, the script enlarges the composition by 1.25 times. By holding down Alt or Option, you can enlarge the compositions by 2 times. By holding down Shift, you can specify any size in pixels. This is how it works if you select compositions in the project panel. However, this script completely reveals its power in working with layers. Let's say you have a few small compositions and you realize that you need to increase their quality without using continuously rasterize. By clicking the script, you'll increase its size and proportionally reduce the scale. As a result, the layer remains as it was, but it gets better quality. This will allow you to quickly increase quality during animation. The second use case is if you need to increase not the entire scale of the layer, but only the size of the composition. By holding Control or Command, you'll switch the mode and increase only the borders with the same proportions by 1.25 by default. You'll increase it by double the same by holding down Alt or Option, and you'll set any size you want by holding down Shift. By the way, in practice, you most often need to increase such layers, but if you need to reduce it, then by holding down Shift, you can specify any width in pixels. The composition will proportionally decrease in width and height. That's all. It's a simple one-button function, but it's really flexible to make such basic actions as quickly as possible. Comp Duration Extend also does exactly what it's called. By default, it increases the duration of all selected compositions by 2 seconds. If the selected compositions are only in the Projects panel, the function will be applied to them. And if the selected compositions are in the Timeline panel, then it will be applied to these ones. Everything is simple. The most important thing, however, is that you can solve several issues with it. By default, all nested compositions and layers inside them are extended as well. Doing it manually is usually the most time-consuming process. By holding down Alt or Option, you'll extend only the selected composition without nested ones. As in the previous functions, if you hold down Shift, you can specify any value in seconds in the window that opens. You can even set a negative value if you want to shorten the composition. Since we most often need to extend compositions, by default, we'll extend them by a few seconds. Another tool for them is Frame Rate Changer. You could come across a situation when you created a lot of compositions, and you need a different frame rate. It's okay if you have a few such compositions, but if you have a few dozen of them, scripts are essential. By default, it sets frame rates to the world's most popular 24 FPS. If you hold down Alt or Option, you'll set it to 30, if Control or Command, 25. If you hold down Shift, you can specify any number of frames. This script also depends on what is currently selected. Items, if something is selected in a project panel, the selected composition layer of all compositions in the project if nothing is selected. It's important for us that our scripts are variable, situational, and smart. In addition to compositions, we can change the frame rate in sequences in the same way. If you select a folder, it will change the frame rate of all the elements inside it. This will simplify your search and minimize your routine work. Now let's move on to another category of scripts, the one for creating 2D and 3D primitives. Creating simple 3D shapes from multiple layers in After Effects has always been a challenge. We have created several keyframe variations. Create Cube creates a shape cube with a null object in the center. Each side gets a random color during each generation. Using shape layers as a base has a number of limitations. By holding down Alt or Option, you'll create the same cube only based on solid layers. It's easier to add effects to them and work those effects. To color them, you can add the fill effect to each side. Everything is very simple here. The Create Pyramid script works on the same principle. It creates a 4-sided pyramid in one click. Or a 5-sided pyramid with Alt or Option held down. There's nothing special here. You can control the rotation of the shapes by using the null layer. The next script is Create Cylinder. It's a little more complex. Unlike a cube, it's hard to make a realistic cylinder truly versatile in After Effects. In this script, we have implemented two versions of the cylinder. By default, a 2D rig is created in one shape layer. The effects have several sliders to control the width and height animation of rotation along one axis, and color controllers for different sides of the cylinder. The animation is created with the help of keyframes and expressions. As a result, we get the best ratio of speed and control flexibility. The shape consists of 5 groups, 2 at the top and bottom side to control the color on both sides, and 1 rectangular shape in the center. You can create another version of a cylinder by holding down Alt or Option. It consists of 3D layers, but due to the limitations of After Effects, it is a 3D simulation. Like the 2D version, it consists of 2 layers on the sides and 1 rectangular layer in the middle. It can only be rotated along 2 axes. The camera in the scene with a long focused length makes its borders more even. We didn't create special controllers for it, so you can control its size using the null layer. Sometimes when creating a 3D rig, some layers may not be visible due to the issues in After Effects. So you can replace it with a 2D version. Another shape I want to show you is a semisphere. It is also difficult to create it manually. And here we have 2 options. By default, we create 2 compositions with the CC sphere effect. It's true 3D, but with the help of the effect, the whole semisphere is located on one layer. This rig with 2 layers allows you to separate the foreground and background of the object. It allows you to place any layer as if inside a semisphere if needed. The parameters of the layer below are related to the one above, so it will rotate and resize together with it. I've also added the fill effect on the bottom layer to color the inner surface of the semisphere, and it takes the color of the outer surface from the composition. It contains a layer with a gradient effect which takes up half the width of the composition. This technique allows you to create a semisphere. If we place such texture throughout the composition, we'll really get a sphere. By adjusting the position of the gradient, we can change the fill of the sphere. This can also look good during animation. There's an alternative mode for creating a semisphere. By holding down Alt or Option, you'll get a shaped semisphere, the rig of which looks like a shaped 2D cylinder. It also has sliders to adjust the size, rotation, and colors. Its rig is also created with keyframes and expressions. Use the version that suits your needs best. That's all for now with 3D primitives. Let's see what else we have to create shapes. The shape waves script creates a parametric complex wave with the help of shape paths. You can get a similar result with several wave warp effects. However, they worsen the image quality and greatly slow down After Effects. It's better for deforming images, but if you're looking for a simple shape wave, this rig might be more suitable for you. It's also convenient to link other layers to such shapes. This wave has a lot of parameters. Let's analyze them in more detail. The first style group changes the way the whole wave looks. All the others are more needed for animation. We can change the wave style between fill and stroke. The version with the fill is especially helpful if you need to use it as a mask for other layers. Since this wave is based on a path, the performance and quality of the wave depends on the number of points on the path. The more points it has, the smoother and more realistic the wave will be, but the more slowly After Effects will work. The enabled tangents smooth function uses Bezier handles to give the wave a more rounded shape. This also affects the speed of After Effects work. If you feel like it's slowing down, you can adjust the round corners parameter, which smooths out the sides using the built-in shape modifier with the same name. We can adjust the height, the length of the wave, and also smooth out the beginning and end of the wave. The wave warp effect can do this with the pinning function, but it only works on compositions, solid layers, and in general, it isn't very convenient to control it. The ease smoother parameter controls the smoothness of the start and end between the initial state and the specified ease start and ease end. Other parameters are basic for any wave: amplitude, frequency, offset, speed, and random. What I also want to point out is that this wave actually consists of 3 waves. The combination of 3 waves allows you to create complex shapes. You can control 2 waves in each group individually. The higher the frequency is, the greater the number of waves will be. You may need more points for this. The overlapping of the wave with a higher and lower frequency will resemble real waves. You can shift them relative to each other. Adjust the amplitude, or in other words, the height of the waves, and adjust their speed. Additional parameters in each group help to control the parameters of 2 waves at the same time. And I was talking about 3 waves. Another one is hidden in the amplitude group, and allows you to control the convexity and concavity of waves. And the random parameters change the speed and shape of the wave randomly, so that each duplicated wave will slightly differ from the other. And that's all here. Let's move on to the next scripts. In Motion Tweaks, we have also added the parsing of all the strokes of the selected layers. All we need to do is select the layers and click the function. The script will parse all the strokes on the layers, place them on a new controller layer, merge the same values, and link them to each other. The distinctive feature of its work is that it works not only with shape strokes, but also with stroke in layer styles and the stroke effect. So you can work with almost all types of layers. It also has an alternative mode. Even if such layers are in compositions, with Alt or Option held down, the script will parse all strokes in nested comps as well. Only now the expression of the link will be relative. The link will point strictly to the current composition, so be careful when duplicating such compositions. Another case that the script takes into account is if the property has an animation with keyframes, the script uses a special version of linking to link the scale to the slider, and you can continue adjusting and animating it manually. The random colors script does exactly one thing. It randomizes all the colors in the selected layers, whether they are inside a shape layer, effects, or layer styles. This can sometimes help you separate layers with the same color or select a more interesting palette for the generated 3D primitives. It doesn't do anything else special. Let's take a look at the next script. Shape direction is another simple script that's necessary for work with shapes. Each path has its own direction, which can be changed inside the shape group here. It's far enough and very inconvenient to control multiple properties. For this task, you need shape direction. It reverses the direction of a selected group. All paths within a selected shape layer or multiple selected layers The 3D Paths script, by default, it creates null objects on all points and Bezier handles. It links the paths to them with the help of an expression so that we can control it by moving the null objects. The null objects also link to each other so that the handles follow the points. And by controlling the central null layer, we can move the entire object. All of them also have 3D mode enabled, so with the help of the central null object, we can rotate this shape layer. If it uses strokes, with this technique, the stroke will always keep its width, and we'll get a pseudo 3D effect. You can do all this in one click so that you can dedicate your free time to more important things and working on the details. It has a few other additional modes. By holding down Alt or Option, you'll create null objects only on points without Bezier handles. Without them, you can't get realistic rotation. So if you don't need it or you don't have arched forms on your shape, this mode may be more useful for you. And here's another mode. By holding down Shift, you can reset the position of the entire layer, inner groups and points relative to the layer's anchor point. What is this for? To make it convenient to control shape layers, to add modifiers, and much more. You need to either draw it exactly from the center of the composition or use the pen tool. If you draw a parametric shape as a circle or a rectangle and then convert it to Bezier path, the position of the group and the entire layer will be shifted to the side. And without manual resetting, it breaks a lot of rigs, scripts, and shape layer controlling. By holding down Shift, you can reset all this automatically, and linking is exactly in the places where the points are located. The toggle effect script does just one thing. It toggles the visibility of all effects and layer styles on the selected layers. If it is a composition, it will toggle effects in all nested compositions as well. It's a very simple action, but for doing it, you usually need to make a lot of special links using expressions. This will help speed up your workflow if you use a lot of effects. Now let's move on to scripts for working with animation. Mathematics is an amazing science that is the basis of everything around us, and it may even be the basis of your animations. Procedural and algorithmic animation is very underrated for simple projects, but trust me, it can save your time. The Sine XY script creates a looped oscillating animation with the help of expressions on two axes, X and Y. For example, you can add it to the position of the layers. By default, if you select layers and apply a script, it will automatically add it to the position properties. An effect with settings will be added to each layer. And all these effects will be linked to a common controller in the composition on the Sine controller layer. With it, you can control all animations at once. Also, the animation on each added layer will go with a slight delay from each other, depending on the order in which you selected the layers. In the case of position animation, you'll see a circular movement, but this is actually an illusion. We're animating the layer along the X and Y axis at the same time, with a slight offset in time. Mathematically calculated offset creates the illusion of a circular movement. In the recent versions of After Effects, layers have a drop-down list where you can select the axis for animation. X and Y will create a simple horizontal or vertical animation. The array time offset parameter controls the timing of the animation. If it's set to 0, the animation will be fully synchronous. The higher the value is, the more they will be shifted in time relative to each other. Amplitude ratio allows you to simultaneously decrease and increase the amplitude of each axis, so the movement trajectory has become more oval. Amplitude increases the distance traveled. Loop cycle controls the animation speed. By default, it is set to 1. That is, a complete looped movement will take 1 second. By setting it to 2, I'll increase the cycle to 2 seconds, thus slowing down the animation. Phase offset does a more complex thing. It shifts the animation time of the axis relative to each other. You'll notice the whole difference by changing the value from 0 to 2. For example, 0.25 makes the movement along the x and y axis synchronous, from which the movement becomes exactly diagonal. Another interesting parameter is easing. You'll better understand it on a vertical or horizontal animation. By default, the animation is smooth and constant. It's the same at every interval of time, and it sometimes looks too mechanical and boring. With the help of easing, we'll make it faster and sharper in one animation phase. In other words, we'll get the effect that the layers dramatically change the speed of their movement. This animation works on almost any property. You can try it on scale. As a result, the layers will be sequentially deformed along different axes. It may not be obvious at first that you can make the animation of two axes synchronous by adjusting phase offset. In this case, a value of 0.75 will work. By adjusting different parameters, you'll get very interesting results. That's all here. Let's move on. If Sine XY is used for predictable oscillating animation, Wiggle is used for more chaotic animation. The Wiggle script also creates an animation system with linked parameters on each layer and the overall controller layer. The basic parameters contain the frequency of the animation, or let's say its speed. The higher the value is, the more often and faster the values will change. The amplitude controls how much the values will differ from the original values. Random seed will help you adjust the values to other random ones if you don't like the current values. There are also a few additional parameters. Axis controls the animation axis. 0 value here makes the animation asymmetrical, which is better for position animation. If the value is 1, it makes the animation symmetrical, which is better for scale animation. The other two numbers make it either horizontal or vertical. We've added an alternative mode for creating a looped version of the Wiggle animation by holding down Alt or Option. We've separated it from the main one because it uses more complex expressions, which greatly slow down After Effects. The parameters here are all the same, but it includes an additional one in which you can specify the cycle time in seconds. Other parameters are used to fine-tune random animation. In this lesson, we won't analyze them since we need to dive deeper into mathematics for this. So that's all for now. Let's have a look at another script. Trim paths is one script which is split into two buttons because they have too many variations. Let's start with a basic click. Depending on where we place the time indicator, the animation and keyframes will be added for the selected shape with the help of the Trim Paths shape modifier. One script adds animation for the shapes first. For a parametric circle, this is usually the upper point. If it's a Bezier path, then depending on where the first point was placed, it can be changed via the context menu. The second script adds the same animation, only this time from the center of the path to both sides. The keyframes will immediately be set with good easings. This is the most basic thing that the script does. However, it has different modifications on different keyframes. By holding down Alt or Option, we'll add animation out from the beginning and middle of the layer as well. By the way, we can combine such animations. First, add animation in, and after a while, add animation out. By holding down Control or Command, you'll add animation in the opposite direction, from the end, or rotated 180 degrees. The cool thing is that we can hold down multiple keys and get a combined animation. For example, by holding both Alt or Option and Control or Command, we'll get animation out from the opposite side. Another modification is that by holding down Shift, we'll add animation in and animation out after a short period of time. At first, the system may seem confusing, but if you use it often, everything will fall into place, and you'll get the needed result instantly. We also have a category of scripts for working with effects and presets. We've placed part of this work into several scripts. For example, Pseudo 3D Stylize adds a range of effects and layer styles to add volume to any selected layer. The depth in it works due to a combination of gradients, light, and shadow. A rich and interesting result can be achieved by combining effects and layer styles with various blend modes. It's a kind of template that will simplify the routine of adding all these parts. After Effects has a small issue. The added effects with position controllers like 4-color gradient and circle on shape layers don't move together with those controllers. They also ignore the layer's rotation and scale. On such layers, we automatically place special expressions that help controllers move along with the layer. If you add effects to compositions, files, and solid layers, these expressions aren't necessary, so they won't be added. Also, depending on the scale and size of the layer, some values need to be manually adjusted to a larger or smaller value. Here, the script also helps set such values proportionally to the size of the layer, so that the effects look as similar as possible. This styling will be a good basis to level up your design. Another script that will help recreate Emmanuel Colombo's techniques from the Motion Tricks and Motion Secrets courses is such a cool deformation of objects with shape twisting. It uses the displacement map effect and a special black and white displacement map. We've also added this rig into the script so that you can recreate it in one click. It places a new composition with a black and white vertical map into the current composition, and an adjustment layer with the time displacement effect. This setup is suitable for horizontal animation, as I currently have in the composition. If you use the version 2022 or newer, we've added special essential graphics controllers to the map composition and linked them to a few sliders. This is an advanced system without absolute links between compositions. This setup can be moved between compositions without manually adjusting expressions. From here, by using sliders, it is easier to control what a simple gradient looks like, stretch it, move it, and rotate it. All this will immediately affect how the deformation looks and your animation. The Dependener script creates a 1 or 2 axis rig with a visual controller. This is pretty much what joysticks and sliders does and is part of Duix functionality. We, however, offer a slightly different, simplified, and faster alternative. It also has different modes depending on what is selected. The simplest 1D rig works like this. Let's say you have a complex animation with many properties. You can combine all these animations with one slider. You need to select all animated properties and click on Dependener. A new layer will appear in the composition on which the slider will be added. All properties will be linked with it. It controls the animation's playback time. By slightly adjusting it, you'll control all the animations linked with it. This will help you save the number of keyframes in complex rigs. You can add more animations. The main thing for this rig is to set keyframes at the same distance and preferably at the beginning of the composition. This isn't required, but this is how the rig will work best. If you didn't change the name of the controller layer and the slider inside it, then by selecting a new property with keyframes and clicking on Dependener, you'll link the property to the slider. If you rename the slider, a new template slider will be created during linking. In this way, you can make a system of different sliders. But you can always continue to link properties to a specific slider. To do this, you need to select any animated properties, and after that, select the slider itself. The properties will be linked to the last selected slider. We've tried to make the script as flexible as possible so that you don't have to change the expressions manually once again. But the most interesting thing is in the 2D rig. Let's say we need to animate this illustration so that we can control the rotation of the layers in different directions with one controller. We can't achieve this with one simple slider. By analogy with other scripts, you need to make several states in all properties. Then the script will check all the keyframes and do all the necessary actions. For volumetric rotation, layers should be placed on all four sides. For this, we need 5 keyframes. In order not to create them manually, you can simply select the empty position properties and click on Dependener. It will generate 5 basic keyframes. To understand on which keyframe you need to place layers, we've prepared a hint for you. Without selecting any layers, click once on Dependener. It will create these 2 schemas. 2 schemas because for 2D rig, we have 2 types of the rig. We'll start with the basic one for now. The size of the circles defines their order. In the first keyframe, the layers should be placed in the center in front of the camera. Then left, right, up, and down. In the second keyframe, the layers need to be rotated as if they were looking to the left. I'll move all 3 layers to the left at different distances. To make the eyes look as if they're rotating around the sphere, you can also animate scale. I'll add keyframes to the scale property with the script. By analogy, all properties need to be changed so that they look at all sides. For best results, the layers should move an equal distance on all sides. Here, let's check if the rig is located correctly on all the keyframes, in accordance with the instruction. Great. Now you can select all the keyframes and click on Dependener. The most important thing is that in this rig, there are 5 keyframes located at an equal distance. The shape controller will appear in the composition. By moving it from side to side, the rig will also change in the same direction. If you've placed everything correctly, the null layer controller can be moved to the side. This rig works with almost all properties, even path. The controller itself has a few more settings. For example, color, the size of the square shape, the distance you need to move the controller to achieve the maximum changes. By default, expressions smoothly change values between the extreme positions and the central one. The 5-4 states switch changes the rig type so that it no longer takes into account the central keyframe and will change values only between the extreme ones. This may work well on position to make it smoother, but it won't work on scale. And here's another slider, Rig Mode. It can be set to either 1 or 2. The second mode corresponds to the second type of rig from our instructions. Instead of horizontal and vertical movement, the rig will work diagonally. First, you also need to place the layers in the center, then place them as if they were looking at the upper left corner, then at the upper right corner, and so on following the instruction. This rig looks a little different and may work better for certain animations.